Okay, so I actually found tonight's topic and class very difficult because there's just so much to say about the Rebbe. Like, which part are you starting with? How are you going to explain? Which angle are you taking? And whichever angle you take, it's almost like you feel like you're missing out. You're just giving so much of a smaller picture than what you should be doing. So I found this very difficult, a real challenge.
For agreeing.
But we'll try, and whatever we cover, that's obviously just this little aspect of what we're covering. Also, feel free if there's any questions that you have that you want to discuss. Like, this is open forum. So I first thought we would talk about what is a Rebbe. Why do we need a Rebbe? Why do we need to have this person who we look at as this Rebbe? And what does the word Rebbe even mean? Well, Rebbe means teacher, but what does it really entail to be a Rebbe? And the first way that we could say is that in Judaism we always have teachers. We always have people who we look up to, people who embody the acts of what we're trying to emulate. We have examples, people that we all look up to. And every person, the Rebbe was always into, every person should have their own Rav or their own mashpia, mentor, or spiritual person who they look up to, because we all need that. We all need somebody that we look up to. On a more cosmic, global scale, the Rebbe was the person that we all looked up to. We needed direction. We needed direction for our generation. And so he was the one that we looked up to, who gave us that direction, who we continue to look to for direction. And we see the Rebbe would give this kind of direction from small things to big things. We would have the prime ministers of Israel would come to him. Begin said, like, this is the most important person that I need to consult when I'm thinking about policy. And we have simple people who would come to him just for direction. It reminds me of Moshe, our first leader of the Jewish people. Why was he chosen to be the leader of the Jewish people? Anyone know why Moshe was chosen?
Because he went after the sheep.
Exactly. It wasn't because of his brilliance. It wasn't because of his eloquence. It wasn't because of his charisma. It wasn't because of his greatness in terms of, like, he was such a, obviously he was all of these things, but it was because he ran after this stray sheep. This stray sheep was running away. He was a flock, he was a shepherd. For his father-in-law, and one of these stray sheep was running away, and he ran after it, and he says, "Come, little sheep, it must be that you're thirsty, and if you're thirsty, let me give you some water." And he took the little sheep to the river to get some water, and God says, "Someone who takes care of his sheep so well, this is who I want to be taking care of my flock, of the Jewish people." And that embodies what a Jewish leader is for the Jewish people. Somebody who obviously has the wisdom and the understanding and the knowledge, but somebody who cares about that little sheep. I did an interview last week with this woman. Her name is Yehudis Fishman. And she was speaking about her connection to the Rebbe because her father was deaf, her mother had cerebral palsy, and her parents divorced when she was young. She never had really who to go to for direction. And at one point she was looking for a match, for a husband for herself. And she didn't know what to do, so she went crying. She sat outside of 770 and she was just sitting there crying. And Rebbe Chodakov, who was my father's uncle, came out and he saw this woman crying, and he told her, "I'm going to get you an appointment with the Rebbe." And he made her an appointment for the very next day, which was so unusual because it usually took months in advance. And one of the things, there was many discussions that she had with the Rebbe, but one thing that I felt that really touched on the Rebbe's humanity and humanness was when she asked, she was dating a man, and the Rebbe says, do you have feelings for this man? And she says, "I love him like I stum love Avas Yisrael." We have Avas Yisrael, we have love of the Jewish people for everybody. And the Rebbe gave a big smile and he says, "For a husband, you need to have more than just regular Avas Yisrael." And the answer just encapsulates, like, something which I find so interesting. Here you have this great sage, this great, tremendous leader. He's concerned about this one woman who doesn't have parents for whom to go to, who doesn't have someone to guide her. And he's not giving her guidance about these spiritual things. He's giving her guidance in everyday life about who to marry, which is spiritual, because somebody else's physicality and somebody else's, the way they lead their life, that is the most spiritual thing that we can do. And this meshing of physical and spiritual, but this was such practical advice, such down-to-earth advice, kind of like a grandfather would give to somebody. So on the first level, that is what a leader is. That is a guide, a spiritual mentor, someone who's a leader for the Jewish people, is somebody who gives that kind of guidance and that wisdom. But like always in our classes here, we go deeper than that. We don't just stop at the surface level, right? So we got to dig even deeper than that. And when we look at the word Rebbe, Reish Beis Yud, it is an acronym for Rosh B'nai Yisrael, the head of the Jewish people. And of course we see the Rebbe was on a surface level, he was definitely the head of the Jewish people. He was giving advice, he was speaking to heads of states, he felt a certain responsibility for every person, no matter where you were on any part of the globe. And he sent his emissaries to go and to make sure that you had the needs of what you needed, that your spiritual needs were taken care of, your physical needs were taken care of. But the word Rosh B'nai Yisrael, which is used as well for our leaders, is significant. Because let's think about what is a head. When we look at a head, we also have the same word for Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. And we say the Rosh Hashanah, what does it mean that it's Rosh Hashanah? That the influence of the entire year is through that Rosh Hashanah. So on that day, we have judgment that decides what's going to be spiritually for us, physically for us, our sustenance, everything for that entire year. When we speak about a Jewish leader as being a Rosh, we're talking about a Jewish leader who understands, obviously, the needs of the people. When we look at our heads, the head is what understands all the particular parts of the body, from the toes and the toenails till the heart and the brain, like all the different parts. It's the Rosh, the head, the brain, that really is the center of where it's at. Now, when we look at the Jewish people, we look at ourselves sometimes as an individual, and we're all individuals. We talk about our individuality, but we are also one people. We're all one connected. And that is why now when the situation in Israel is the way it is, we feel it. We feel like it's our brothers, it's our sisters. We feel that connection. More so on a spiritual level, when something is happening there, we know that we can influence the situation and the outcome here, because we're like one body, we're all connected. So we pray here, we do extra tefillot here. We try to do our part because we're all connected as this one central body. And that's why when the Jewish people went down to Egypt, it says, Shivim nefesh yardu Mitzrayim, 70 soul. It should be 70 souls. They went down to Egypt. It says 70 soul, because they were one soul, one connected soul. So when we talk about the Jewish people as one body, when we talk about the head of this one body, what do we mean by that? Well, we see that it says in Tanya, the central book on Hasidus philosophy, that there's all different kinds of souls that come to this world. There are, just like there's all parts of the body, every one of us is connected to God. Every single one of us is connected to God. But just like, and every one of us is, it says, Chelak Elokam Imal Mamish, we're an actual part of God. We are a part of God. That's in us. But there are times when we don't feel that connection so strongly. And some of us have less of a feeling and less of a sensitivity. And many of us have less of that sensitivity. And we know that in different generations, the souls were more connected, and in our generation, we're a little less connected because we've gone through all that we've gone through. That doesn't mean we're not as great, and we're the ones that are going to be charged with bringing Mashiach, but we're going to get into it. But when we talk about souls, when we talk about, for example, a child that's born to a father, there's all the parents, right? The parents. We know that this child is coming from the brain of the father, from the actual person of the father, but there's all different parts to the body. There's the toes, there's the toenails, there's the knees, there's the arms, there's so many different parts. And some of those parts don't feel as intensely as the brain feels. They're not as connected. They're further away. When we talk about the Jewish people in this way, we are all different souls. And that feeling of connection to God, that feeling of sensitivity that we have to God, many of us aren't feeling always that connection. We look at our world as a very physical world, and we see the physical world, and it's hard to see the spirituality in the world. It's hard to see godliness. We're always trying to do that. We're always trying to uncover it, and there's a part of us that can connect to it, but when we look at our world, we see a world. We don't see God. But there is, therefore, God gave something very special, a very special gift to every generation, and he says, he will put in every generation a tzaddik, a holy person, a head soul, the soul that's the head, that actually sees godliness, that actually feels godliness, that actually sees the purpose and the reason why we're here. And when that soul sees it, it can direct those souls that are the feet, that are the hands, that are the hearts, that are the different parts. And you need all these parts. Just like a body needs all the parts. If the body is only going to have the brain, it's not going to be able to walk, right? It's not going to be able to jump and do things. It's not going to be able to take the hands and bake things and create things. But you need the heart, the head. You need the head to give it that understanding and that explanation. So when we talk about a Rebbe being a Rosh B'nai Yisrael, we're talking about that soul that has the power of being that brain, of being that connection, connected to God, that sensitivity to God, so that it can then help us to uncover our purpose. Just like the brain helps you to understand where the feet should go, where the hands should go, how we should move, right? What we should be doing. The brain helps each and every one of us to understand what our purpose here in the world is. And that's why the Rebbe says, I'm not here to change anybody. He's not there to change anybody. What he's here is to help us understand why we're here, what our purpose is, what we're needed for, what is our uniqueness, what is our talent, what is it that we can be doing. And that's why the Rebbe always encouraged people to do more, to be more, because he can see into who and what we are. So that is really what it means to be a leader, to be this soul, this head part of the Jewish people. And that's why the Torah tells us as well. It says, the Torah tells us that it's a mitzvah to cleave, to attach ourselves to tzaddikim. Why? Why should we attach ourselves to tzaddikim? Because you want to know God, you want to understand God. We're the feet, or we're the knees, or the different parts of the body. It's hard for us to be that sensitive to godliness. So attach yourself to these tzaddikim, to these talmidei chachamim, to people who know Torah. Attach yourselves to them, cleave to them, so that you can get that perspective, so that you can see that vision, that way of understanding things that we otherwise do not have. And we see this really, we've been going through the weekly Torah portion. We see this very clearly with the transmission of the Torah. When the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai, what happened? God said first, Anechi, Anechi Hashem Elokecha, and all of the Jewish people heard it. And then what happened? It says the illumination was just so awesome that they couldn't handle it. They all fainted. And it says that God had to revive them. He revived them after each statement because they fainted from the impact of this awesome revelation. It was just too much for them to handle. And they said, Moshe, please, you say the rest to us. You tell us the rest. And when it came to the rest of the Torah learning, the same thing. They said, Moshe, you be the one to transmit it to us, because the experience is just to awesome. And why do they feel that way? Like, why couldn't they say, well, let God just revive us again, right? But it was God wants us in this physical world. He doesn't want us to wake up every day, and the moment we wake up, hear God speaking to us. Okay, it says if you hear God speaking to you, you have problems, right? Because that's not normal, right? The normal person doesn't really hear God talking to them, you know? It's like Biden says, I'm going to retire if I hear God giving me a message, right? In that interview that he just did.
Yeah, let's just pretend one of us is God. He'll be quiet because he's so far.
Right. So,
Say it again.
so we don't wake up actually hearing God talking. And we don't wake up with God actually like communicating to us. We don't feel God. Why don't we? Why don't we? If God wants us to serve him, why don't we? Why doesn't he make himself known to us?
Because then we'd have no choice.
Exactly. Exactly. So God would rather that we have less spiritual sensitivity and that this world feel very dark and very ungodly sometimes, if we could even say that, but we don't sense godliness in this world so that we can find him, so that we can look for him, so that we can search, so that we can find our own strength and we can find God's strength. But you need a leader sometimes to show you, where do I go? What do I do? I'm so lost. And in generations, especially in our generation, where we're so far away from the giving of the Torah, and there's so much happening in the geopolitical scene and everywhere around us, and in our personal lives, we need that, what do I do now? And sometimes, you need to be able to decipher. The Torah is great, and the Torah gives direction for everything, but you need to decipher, how is it giving me direction in today's time, in today's society? I could look at it and I could see it, but I'm reading the story and it doesn't speak to me. I need to understand, how do I decipher it? How do I apply it? How do I make it now, practical to now? And for that, in this darkness, in this time, when we are such unspiritual, the knees or the ankles or the toes, how do we do it? With the direction of somebody who's greater than we. And that's the point of a Rebbe. That is the point of having a Rebbe teaching it to us. And therefore...
Now who would it be? Because if we don't have a Rebbe, so who do people go to in, let's say, in the Chabad circles? Who do you go to?
Perfect question. Great question.
Well, you know,
So we say that after... And that's for a few pages down, but we'll go to that now. We say that when a tzaddik passes away, the impact of the tzaddik's life, he's even here more than even in...
Yes, I understand going to the Ohel or whatever, right? But you might actually need, an answer from somebody, that's why you have the Rebbe.
Right. So we have how do we connect today to the Rebbe? There's the teachings of the Rebbe, what he's taught us, the letters of the Rebbe, where he guided people, and you can see there's so many, hundreds, thousands of letters of every personal situation and circumstance that you can see from there the guidance that you need to have. And the Rebbe himself gave us guidance. If it comes to a health situation, this is what you should do. In a health situation, you make sure that you ask a friend who's a doctor, somebody who's close to you, then get a second opinion. If the second opinion is different than the first, then, in other words, he gave us those guidelines for every situation, how to do it. And the fact is that we see that people today are children today, the youngsters today. When, as Chani said, when 30 years ago, when the Rebbe passed away, people were saying, what's the continuation of the Chabad movement? Like, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And you see today, these children are growing up who never saw the Rebbe, never experienced the Rebbe. I can tell you my own grandchildren, and they know more about the Rebbe than I know.
Wow.
Seriously. I was interviewing Rabbi Lou, who was somebody who had such a connection to the Rebbe. He had so many personal one-on-ones with the Rebbe, and so many letters, of course, but personal connections that he had and personal guidance. And he was saying to me, my grandchildren are more connected to the Rebbe than I am. They know more about what the Rebbe does because it's so. We're hearing all these stories, and you're printed, the books that are written, the books that are available. You're hearing so much more than he did in his time. So the direction that's given, and because of social media, and because of the internet, and because of the books that are more and more available, and because of the videos that were taken, all these things make us understand and know the Rebbe more than ever. So this, every generation needs somebody, but we're not out of tune, we're not out of touch. The Rebbe's advice is as much potent now as it was 30 years ago or 50 years ago, because it's so relevant. It's telling us what it is. Any other questions before we continue? Does that explain a little bit? Okay, so we also see that there is this concept, and we're going to get a little Kabbalistic here, because I know these people, you love Kabbalah. There is this concept similar to what we're saying about the Rosh. There's this concept that's called a neshama klalis, which is an all-encompassing soul. Because when we talk about the Jewish people as we're one body, we're one soul, Shivim Nefesh, the 70 souls, which is soul, written as soul, not nefashos. Shivim nefesh yardu Mitzrayim. The 70 souls that went down to Mitzrayim were one soul. We're all one soul. And so there is this root, the soul root, this soul stem, from which all of this, kind of like the brain, from which all the souls are connected, that is the stem of it, the root of it, that connects us all and understands all the different components because they're all part of that soul. And that's why we see very often the Rebbe knew things. He understood things about us that we didn't even understand. People will tell you about those moments that they went by for dollars, or the moments that they saw him. There was this soul connection. You can't even understand what it was, because it was a soul looking at a soul. And a soul looking at a soul that knows it, because we're all connected, and it sees that connection. It sees how we're all connected. It was interesting. There was a story by someone whose name was Yehuda Avner, who was the advisor to many prime ministers in Israel. And he came to the Rebbe one of the times that Begin came into the Rebbe to ask different advice. So he came in, and Begin was having a lot of different discussions with heads of state, and they were wondering, why is Begin coming to ask the Rebbe? And he came to report exactly what was the result of the talk, because the Rebbe told Begin exactly what to say and how to say it and what approach to take. And he came in afterwards to report on the results. And when he came in, he says to the Rebbe, this was like audiences that were done late at night, 2 a.m. And he comes in and he says, a lot of your followers are saying things about you that even the Rebbe doesn't say about himself. Because we say all things about the Rebbe, how capable he is, how he knows things. He says, and he kind of was saying, what is it that you believe about yourself? What is it that you think about yourself, about your own powers? Kind of good chutzpah, right? Yeah. And the Rebbe says to him, let me tell you what I do. Let me tell you exactly what I do. When you take a candle, there's the wick of the candle, there's the wax, but it's not making anything. You have the lump of wax and you have that stem, that's the wick, but that's not making a fire. But it's only when you take the fire and you light the wick that it becomes a candle, that lights. He says, what is the wick, and what is the wax, and what is the flame? So the wick is the neshama that we all have. The wax, the soul that we all have. The wax is the body that we all have. What is the flame? The flame is the Torah. The Torah ignites the body and soul and connects it, it makes it one. And that is what I try to do. I try to ignite people. I try to make them this bulk of wax and the stem. I try to make it into a candle. I try to make it make light. And at the end, they spoke for a long time after. They were going through a lot more, issues. And several hours later, Yehuda Avner says to the Rebbe, "So, did you light my candle? Is that what you did at this meeting?" And he says, "No, you have to light your own candle. The only thing I can give you is the match. I give you the match, but you gotta light it." And that's what I see as my role. I am here to provide that match, and then it's for you to actually light it and ignite it and make it into what it is. So you asked, so how do we connect to the Rebbe today? What do we do to connect to the Rebbe? How is it that, what do we do today? So very important is to learn. We learn constantly. We're learning every week. We're learning a lot of the different interpretations and understandings of what the Rebbe says. And it's not something that's just, this knowledge, but we can see how it's actually very applicable to our own life, to today's times, to situations and times. And of course, follow the Rebbe's instructions and guidelines and his letters, what he instructed us in how to deal with different situations. Many people will also say a chapter of the Rebbe's Tehillim. That's how you connect to somebody. I didn't know when my father passed away, I was told to keep on saying his chapter of Tehillim for the year that it represents. So if a person, for example, my father passed away when he was 90, so we say 91. If a person is 90, and as his birthday came, I started saying 92, because for his 92nd year, and you keep on going each year, and that's how you connect to that soul. You connect to the soul of the person. So you'll see many people will say the Rebbe's chapter of Tehillim. When we say different verses of Tehillim for different things, you'll see they'll say as well the chapter of Tehillim. You'll see pictures very often on the wall, like that picture there on the wall of the Rebbe, because we want to look at holy people, everything that we look at has an effect on us. When you look at something that's a holy, it reminds you how you should be acting, what you should be doing. What would the Rebbe think about this? And how should I therefore connect and do what he would want me to be doing? And then we also write till today. You said, how do we connect to the Rebbe? We write to the Rebbe. If you have a problem, and there are so many stories from people who go to the Ohel of the Rebbe, who have problems and issues. And I could tell you personal stories. So we all have personal stories of things and ways that people were helped, miraculous stories of ways people were helped by going to the Rebbe, praying at the gravesite. The gravesite of a holy person is holy. It remains holy. And connecting to that holiness changes your perspective. When you leave the Ohel, you feel different. You feel like, there's a lot of different feelings, but I remember once thinking, like, it's almost like when you come home after a long, long journey, you come home to your parents, and you kind of just let it all out. I'm just leaving all my troubles, all my packages, all my suitcases. I'm leaving it all here, all the difficulties that I'm going through. You feel lighter. You feel like you're lighter because you've prayed in this holy place. And you've obviously, if we're talking about, it says that usually, when a person is sick, the person's own prayers are the most effective. But when you ask somebody, like a righteous person, to pray for you, especially somebody who is this neshama klelis, this general soul who knows what you're going through, you're not asking somebody else, you're asking a deeper part of yourself to pray for you. And therefore the prayers are even more potent when it is done in that way. So when we ask the Rebbe, we're not praying to the Rebbe, God forbid. We never pray to the Rebbe. But we ask the Rebbe to pray on our behalf, to intercede with God, to say to God, please help us. And again, if any one of you has, a parent who passed away, like I find myself often talking to my father and saying, Daddy, I really need you, can you help with this? Can you do something for me? And all the more so a Rebbe who's the father of us all, that neshama klelis, that general soul, that root soul of us all. So I want to go into a little bit. Let's see how much. Okay, we still have a few minutes. So when we look at the Rebbe as this Rebbe, this Rosh B'nai Yisrael, this head of the Jewish people, there's a lot of ways that we look at life differently. The Rebbe taught us how to look at life. We're often looking through life through very physical eyes, and we're seeing things in a very physical way. And we see people in a physical way, and we see events in a very physical way, and we see situations in a very physical way. And the Rebbe taught us to peel away the layers and see things from a deeper perspective, a spiritual perspective. And I want to go through the basic ones of how we do that. I think the first and foremost way that we do that the Rebbe taught us to look at things differently, is how we look at ourselves and others around us. To not see ourselves as these faults and these problems and these, deficiencies, but to actually see ourselves as a beautiful soul. And when we see ourselves as this beautiful soul, our potential and our capabilities are infinite. When we don't see ourselves as what I've done and a victim of my circumstances, and because of this, I am so, it completely changes us. I just interviewed, it hasn't gone live yet, a rabbi whose name was Rabbi Yosef Kulik, who was actually a Chabad Shliach in Hartford, Connecticut. And his mother, when she was 17, she met this black man, and she had a relationship with him, and she became pregnant, and she had this Yosef. He later became abusive, so she had to run away from him, and she ran away they were in Cleveland, and the shelters wouldn't take her because she was 17 when she had this little Yosef. She was too young to go to a shelter, so where did she go? She went to Rabbi and Mrs. Kazin in Cleveland. The Chabad Shluchim took her in because her older brother had some kind of connection with Chabad, and he said, maybe they'll help. And they said, sure. They took her in. And so she started learning more about Judaism, what she hadn't learned about, and she decided she wanted more and more about it. And she decided to go to New York and really enroll in a women's college of learning, Beis Chana, a seminary of Lubavitch learning, and became religious as a result. When she...
With the baby?
Sorry?
With the baby?
My question.
With the baby, yes, with the baby. She did not give up the baby. And when the baby, this little Yosef was, I think he said when he was 4 years old, his mother married his father who adopted him, Kulik, that was his name. And they went on to they moved to Chicago and they lived there, and they went on to have a whole large family of children. I don't know if he said 10 or 12 other siblings. And they always treated him as one of them. His father wasn't his biological father, his adoptive father adopted him, and he always felt like one. But here's this man who is black because of his father. And he looks black, and he's going to a school with Ashkenazi kids who are white. And he talks about, how he grew up in his own family. He was never discriminated against, and in his immediate family, and even in the school, some of the schools, the kids that knew him didn't. But at various times in his life, you can imagine, he went to different overnight camps or different situations where people called him all kinds of horrible names and very racist kind of ideas. And he says, for a long time, he was speaking to me now. He's an older man. He has children, married children. And he's saying he never spoke about this. He never wanted to go public about this because he hadn't worked on him. He hadn't worked out these parts of himself. And it was only in the last many years last maybe 5 or 10 years, that he was really working on himself to stop feeling that deficiency, that my soul is deficient, that I'm deficient, that all those things that people had said to him, he kind of affected him. It became what he looked at himself. He says when his parents, his father and his adoptive father and his mother got married, he was able to go into the Rebbe for Yechidus. They took him with, and the Rebbe was asking him all about his tzitzis and made him feel very special. He says, but it still took many years till he actually studied and learned, and through the learning and teachings of Chassidus, he was able to separate what he had gone through from who he was, and not looked at himself as this person who has these deficiencies, these blemishes, as he said. And this is one of the things that the Rebbe, as the soul, is teaching us to look at things on a soul level, that we don't see ourselves for the deficiencies, for the things that we have gone through in life, but that we see ourselves, as the Rebbe said one time, that people were asking him, how are you standing in line? The Rebbe would give out dollars, and he would stand for hours and hours and hours. And he says, like, aren't you tired? He says, when you're counting diamonds, you don't get tired. When I was interviewing Rabbi Lou, he said this beautiful story that he remembers. So that I said, what was one of the things that most touched you? And he says, what most touched me is I was getting kos. The Rebbe would give out kos shel bracha, which is he would give from his cup of wine. He would give to everyone, just like he gave out dollars on the holidays. He says, and the lines were like endless. Everyone was lining up to get from the Rebbe. And here's a man in his 80s standing for hours and hours and hours and hours on end. The boys were tired. The girl, like everyone was tired. You were exhausted from standing in line. The line would wind all the way around. He says, at first it was 4 lines, and then it went into 3 lines, and then it went into 2 lines, and finally, like, it's 1 line. And finally, like, you're there, like everyone was exhausted from it. He says, and the Rebbe finally gave out the last one, and he looks and he says, is there anyone else?
Oh, wow.
Is there anyone else who wants to get? And that love, that care, because why? Because he didn't see it as a physical body. It was just coming and getting, another one coming for me and coming and getting for me. But it's a soul. It's a soul that's there. And how can I not give to that soul? How can I, as this neshama klos, as this general soul, he wanted to attach himself to connect. Where is that soul? Where is another soul? Is there anybody else who wants to get from me? I'm here, I'm ready, I want to give. There's another story that was told, actually with Chani's uncle. Rabbi Kotlarski is your... Yeah. Cousin, sorry, with her cousin, who we dedicated one of the classes to, if you remember. Anyways, there was a young boy in Curacao who was having a lot of problems in school. He was being bullied because he was a Jew. And I don't remember the entire story, but the Rebbe sent actually her cousin to go and to help this family. And the father was like totally astonished when he sees these boys coming off like looking for a Jewish person, because he had just said, like, I just wish that someone would help me, the Rebbe would help me in some way. In any case, what I want to bring out from that story, though, is afterwards, the father of the boy, he ended up taking the boy and putting him in a yeshiva. He went to school. He took him to a Jewish school, first a Jewish camp and then a Jewish school, and the boy no longer had all these problems, of course, and he learned about Judaism. But this father later wrote to the Rebbe, and he said, I just want to thank you from this little Jew in Curacao. And the Rebbe says, I take issue with the words that you're writing. There's no such thing as a little Jew. Every person is such a soul. And if you look at yourself as a soul, then no one is little. Even a soul that we spoke about the different parts of the soul. Even a soul that's a little toe soul is huge. This is a soul. This is a connection to God, who's infinite. This is an amazing person. So never look at yourself. Never look at yourself, and never look at others as so small. And I can't. No, you're connected to something of greatness. The philanthropist George Rohr used to make a minyan. And he was very proud once. He made a minyan for beginners. And he came to the Rebbe and he says, I made this minyan for beginners who have no background in Judaism. And the Rebbe says, what? And he repeated himself. And he had to repeat himself a few times, and he didn't understand. He thought the Rebbe would give him like a pat on the back. Great what you're doing. But he says, the Rebbe told him, there's no such thing as a Jew without background. Every Jew has background. We're all the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. That's each and every one of us. There's no secular Jew. There's no Jew without background. There's no real irreligious Jew. These words were not in the Rebbe's vocabulary because we are all souls. And the soul of us is connected. There's no such thing as a not connected person. We are all connected, and we're not blemished. None of us are that blemish. And that's why when it came to Torah study, until now, it used to be Torah study was the domain of the scholars. Scholars would be involved in Torah study. What did the Rebbe do? He says each and every one of us has to learn. Not only each and every one of us, but even the little children. And the little children all the more so, the little children we called Sivos Hashem, the army of God. And why is he calling it the army of God? Because we're fighting this spiritual battle now. We are, literally, and even when women would give out Neira Shabbos Kodesh, it was called Neshek, which means ammunition. And the truth is, we see now, this is our spiritual ammunition. We're here, we're not on the forefront, on the lines in Israel. And, he really trained us how to look at a Jewish soul. And you see this more and more. A friend of mine was saying to me, who lives in Pomona, she has a son who's not religious. And she said he had served in the army. He had served in the army.
Positioning system.
That's
good. I like that.
He had served in the army years ago, and now during the war he went back for Miluim, even though he didn't need to. He's not an Israeli citizen, and he decided he needs to go back to. He wants to help, and So he's telling his mother that, I don't know if I should even announce this, but on a certain date, he and his whole battalion are going in to Rafah. He says it's going to be like big, very soon. Like a lot of people are going in, and it's going to be, they're just going to like end it, really end it. And his mother said to him, people are asking me if I'm feeling nervous about this, that you're going in. And she says, and I say to them that, it could happen to anybody wherever they are. If it's the time has come, the time has come. It could be anywhere, to any of us. And he says, no, Ma, I take issue with that. She says, what do you mean? What are you feeling? He says, I know that I'm going in, and he's actually a sniper, which is really dangerous. He says, I know that I'm going in, I know it's dangerous, and I hope that I'll come out. But I want to tell you that in the event, God forbid that I don't, I will have fulfilled my greatest purpose in life. Now, his connection to the Jewish people, his connection to protecting the Jewish people. How do you understand this? This is a young boy in his young 20s. How do you understand this other than saying, this is a soul talking. This is not a body talking. This is a soul. He's not religious. He's not even religious. This is a soul talking. And that's what the Rebbe taught us. I don't know if, we've all seen that clip of that boy who was on the way to the Nova Festival, and he was singing, Shamash and Asata Bi, like this is a soul singing. He wasn't religious, and he's singing the songs with such the soul that you've given me. You take and you give it. You give it to me and you take it. It's a soul that's singing. You can't see it other than that. And in previous generations, we would look at people who aren't religious and we'd say, oh, they're not connected. They're not keeping Torah. Their body is not keeping Torah. Their body is not religious. That's true. Their body is not religious. But when you look at a Jew, when you look at somebody and you don't see the body, but you see deeper, the soul, you see, look at this shining soul, this gorgeous soul. That is how we need to look at people, and that is how we need to look at ourselves. And that's why the Rebbe always encouraged people. He wasn't just this person who was like, everything is great, After you did a program, people would report to him and say what they did. He says, great, next time I want double. You know, oh, you had 100 people? Next time 200 people. You did one program? Where's the next program? Even bigger, even more. Why? Not because what you did wasn't good enough. You know, it wasn't a criticism for what you've done. But if you are capable of doing such a great thing, such an infinite thing, your soul is capable of doing this infinite thing, of doing a mitzvah, which is something so infinite. If this is what you are capable of, how could you not do more? Not because what you did isn't good enough, but because what you did is so great, because you are so great. If you have these capabilities, how could you not do more? And again, like if we would look at other people in that way, our children in that way, not as the deficiencies of what they aren't doing, but if this is what you're capable of doing, how much more could you be doing? And if we would look at ourselves in the same way, not because, oh, what I did, I'm not good enough. Like we're always telling ourselves these messages of not good enough. No. You're great. But if you are great, then you need to do even more. So I think, you know, and we can go on and on with this message of how the Rebbe looked at people. And then we see this as well with how there's a story of this man. His name is Yosef Kabelov, who was injured in the summer of 1976 in the Golan Heights. His Jeep hit a mine that exploded and he lost both his legs. And he was feeling very dejected, you know, and he felt like even in Israel, you know, he would go to different things and people didn't know how to relate to him. It was either sympathy or this like, people didn't know how to look at him, how to relate to him. And he came into the Rebbe with a whole group of disabled people. And the Rebbe said, he says, you know, the Jewish people are always into giving their opinions on things. So I'm also going to give my opinion on something. And he says, you know, until now, they've been called Nidche Yisrael, the disabled people of Israel. I think you should be called Mitzuyone Yisrael, the special, the exceptional people of Israel. And this wasn't just semantics. The Rebbe said to them all, why do I feel that you should be called the special, the Mitzuyane Yisrael? Because when God takes away the capabilities of one limb, God gives the ability of something else. And you have even more of that ability that you can achieve than the regular person can. And we know this, if a person's blind, they have usually hearing is bad. So you might be deficient in one area, but you're exceptional in other areas. Let's focus on that exceptionalism. And you know, this before it was the norm to call special children. The Rebbe said, let's call them special children. And even in terms of how we look at certain things, he didn't want to use words that were negative words. It wasn't a beis chayla, a house of sick. A hospital was considered a beis chaylim, a house of sickness. It was always beis refuah, a house of healing. Thank you, yes. So this is how we look at ourselves, how we look at others. Even more so, it's events in our lives. And I'm just going to go through this a little fast. When it comes to events in our lives. So we can look at events in our lives with the physical eyes that we have and say, you know, life really sucks sometimes. It's really pretty nasty. You know, look around you and things really feel sometimes really nasty. We go through hardships, we go through situations, we see sickness, we see things that are unfortunate, we see unfairness, we see trauma, we see abuse, we see horrible things. We see now, I mean, we have the hostages there in Israel that are still there. We see a lot of negativity and we could feel that negativity. The Rebbe was somebody who lived through the Holocaust, lost his family, lost everything. So it wasn't this person who was just living in La La Land, who was like, oh, everything is great. You know, sometimes you see these toxically positive people. Oh, everything is great.
You know, you're like, what's wrong?
You know, they're really great on your nerves because things are not great, right? We're not talking about someone like that. And yet the Rebbe insisted that this world is God's garden. It's a beautiful garden. And if we could look at that as a garden, that God wants good for us, God only wants good for us. And sometimes we don't understand. He never gave excuses. People asked him, why did the Holocaust happen? Some people would blame it. Some Jewish religious leaders blamed it on different things. Never. The Rebbe was so angry when he heard that. We don't understand why it happened. That was his answer. We don't understand, but we know that God has a plan. And we know the plan is something good. And we know the result is going to be something good. And, that was how he looked. He didn't deny the sorrow that a person was going through, but at the same time, he refused to be sucked into that negativity. He refused for us to be sucked into this horrificness. When he spoke about the Holocaust, it wasn't about anti-Semitism and all that. It was about how can we rebuild? How can we regrow? What can we do to strengthen Judaism? Not the eyes of how hard it is and how difficult it was. What can we do to now regrow, to now rebuild? There's this beautiful story with Eli Wiesel that he came to the Rebbe, and Eli Wiesel, of course, lost his father in Buchenwald. His father was shot in front of him, and he was completely so traumatized from it. He couldn't function anymore. And he came to the Rebbe, and they were talking for a long time. And he says, why did it happen? And the Rebbe says, what do you want from me? Like, what are you asking? What do you want from me? And they were talking for a long time. And he says, first he says nothing. And then later on in the discussion, he says, okay, I know what I want from you. He says, what do you want from me? He says, what I want from you is to make me cry. To make me cry. Because I'm so paralyzed. I've lost that ability to cry. The fountain of tears has just dried up. I'm not feeling anything after seeing that. I can't. And the Rebbe answers him, I want more from you. I don't want to make you cry, but I want to make you sing. And it's that acknowledgement. Of course, first comes the crying, first comes the tears, but don't end with that. Don't end with those tears. Acknowledge the difficulty. We're physical beings. We see the physical world. We see the hardship. We see the sorrow. We see what's around us. We see the crisis that we're having. But it's not enough to stop there with the crying. I need you to see the singing. I need you to come out of it. I need you to strengthen yourself from the circumstances of life, the situations that life gives to us, and know that the end is positive. Know that there is going to be a good ending. There's a beautiful story. I think I shared part of it with you. It actually involves my father. And Kfar Chabad. There was a terrible terrorist act on Kfar Chabad in April 1956 on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And Kfar Chabad was this little village that Lubavitcher Hasidim from Russia established, and these were burly Hasidim who had seen everything and had gone through who knows what in Russia. But during this terrorist attack, there were 5 children and a teacher who were shot. It was during the children's prayers. There was the siddur was caked with blood. It was just a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. And after this horrific act, the Hasidim were just didn't know what to do. They literally did not know what to do. Here was these Hasidim who had such strength, and they fought communism, and they fought Stalin and all that, and here they were, but they said, here we're in Israel, and this is happening in Eretz Yisrael. And to the children, what did the children do? And the whole city, the whole village was completely devastated. So what did they do? Immediately they wrote a telegram to this. In these days it was only a telegram. They wrote a telegram to the Rebbe, and this was the end of Nisan, in Rosh Chodesh Iyar, when it came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was about to go out for Farbrengen to give a public discourse. And the secretaries that got this telegram telling them what had happened decided, we're not going to tell the Rebbe before the Farbrengen, we'll wait till afterwards to give him this terrible, devastating news. And that entire Farbrengen, the Rebbe was crying. No one knew why. Rebbe's crying. It was usually a very happy time. The Rebbe was crying. He was talking about Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice for the land of Israel. and the strength of the Jew, and he was crying and like terrible, copious tears coming, and people were wondering, like, what is the Rebbe talking about and crying so much, and what about all this Mesiras Nefesh, giving up of your life, self-sacrifice? And but the secretaries who were there knew why the Rebbe, they got this telegram, and even though they hadn't told the Rebbe, obviously somehow he knew. So they came after the Farbrengen, they brought the telegram to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe closeted himself for 4 days and 4 nights in his room. He didn't come out. No answer, nothing. After that, he wrote a telegram. And in Israel, in Kfar Chabad, they were wondering, like, why is the Rebbe not answering us? There's no answer. What are we supposed to do? And they wanted some kind of direction, some kind of comfort. Nothing came for the first few days. And then they got this telegram from the Rebbe with just 3 words. The words were Behemshach Habinyan Tinachamu, which means with continued building, you will be comforted. And suddenly the people felt, we have a purpose, we have a direction. The Rebbe's telling us, rebuild, do something with it. You will be comforted when you rebuild. You cannot allow this to break you. You need to rebuild. There is going to be a positive ending to this situation. And again, let's look at the situation. The Rebbe didn't answer this right away. People need to have that time to express their tears, to feel the pain that you're feeling. But we don't want to stop with the crying. We want to go on to the actual singing. We want to focus on the rebirth, on the continuation, on the making this something positive. So we look around and we're physical beings and we don't understand what's going on. But we need to somehow pull back the curtain, pull back the layers, and say when we see things, not in an insensitive way, but there is going to be a positive ending to it. I don't see how, I don't see why. And this is in our own situations and even on the global level. That we're progressing to something positive, that life is progressing in a positive way, and this is happening for a reason that we cannot fathom, but ultimately, this is part of the God's grand plan, and it is going to culminate in something good and something positive. And what is that thing that is so positive? And that is, of course, the next thing that the Rebbe was so into, and that we'll stop with that, and that is Mashiach. Mm-hmm. So the Rebbe says, from when I was a little child, I was so obsessed. He uses the word, I was obsessed with Mashiach. Why? Why was the Rebbe obsessed with Mashiach? Because he sees the world not as a physical being, but peeling back the layers to the world is going on a journey. We're all progressing in the journey. And Mashiach is on the way. And not only that, but he told us that we are the generation that is bringing Mashiach. And yet we see, well, the Rebbe's not here. What does that mean? That means that we are the ones that have to do it. And that's what the Rebbe said right before his passing. He says, I tried, I did everything that I can, and now I'm giving it over to you, to each and every one of us. Because as we speak so much, when there is this revelation of godliness, when it's so open, when it's so obvious, the fact that we're yearning for Mashiach, the fact that we're trying to bring Mashiach is something so obvious. But when there is this darkness, when we don't have even a leader who's going to tell us to bring Mashiach, that is the final steps that we need to create what we call this Dira B'Tachtonim, this God in this physical world, God living here in this physical world, bringing this godliness into our world. And that's where we are now. And that's where each and every one of us is connected, and that's why on Gimel Tammuz, on a yahrzeit of any person, the soul goes even higher, whether it's any person, and all the more so when we're talking about the yahrzeit of such a saintly person, of the neshama klalos, the Rosh B'nai Yisrael. The neshama is going higher and higher, and may it achieve its purpose of helping us, but may we continue in doing what we need to do, and that is what we've been entrusted to. We look at Jewish history, and it's going in a direction. And we know we've already, if we look at the 6 days of creation, each day represents different times, and we're already at Friday, on the eve. Shabbos is already a time period which is a completely different time period. It's a time period which is a different world. We're ready Friday afternoon, and we need to be prepared for the world, to prepare the world for Mashiach, because this is right now, right there, right at our doorsteps, and we've been promised that we're the ones to do it. So we just need to hang in there and not only hang in there, but to create that song, not to let the tears overcome us, but to realize it's with building, not only that we will be comforted, but that we will create comfort for the world. And the comfort that the world needs right now, the only thing that the world needs right now, is Mashiach, is a life of what the destiny of the world is supposed to be, that the world is coming to its completion, where we've achieved what God created the world for. And may that happen immediately.
Amen.
Amen. Wow.